One of the most well-known vampire films of all time was 1987's The Lost Boys. This film is some people's pick for greatest vampire film of all time, so of course a channel dedicated to vampire films should review it, right? Well, problem is this is a channel dedicated to female vampires and this film is a sausage fest. You see, the original audience of the film was the Tiger Beat audience, teenage girls with expendable income that kept the shopping malls alive in the 1980s, meaning the film revolved around the mainstream male teenage stars of the day. Now, the film did have an almost female vampire in the form of the group Seductress Star, played by Jamie Gertz, but this is a does she or doesn't she, and the answer is she doesn't. Apparently, Joel Schumacher also had an issue with the only female in the film being used as a glorified babysitter, as it's been said that he always wanted to have a sequel that involved females. This film, tentatively titled The Lost Girls, never happened. On the other hand, a sequel did end up happening without him in 2008, which comes off as a modern retelling that does address the lack of female vampires in the original, and even though modern review sites aren't that big on it, it was one of the best-selling DVDs the year it came out, and was very successful financially. So let's go ahead and recap Lost Boys, The Tribe. Our film starts on a beachside town. Some surfers sneak onto a private property in order to surf, but the owner comes out and confronts them. The owner threatens the surfers, showing his fangs, but much to his surprise, instead of getting scared, the surfers fang out themselves and kill the guy. Next, we see a guy and his sister pull up to a home. They're welcomed by their aunt, who then takes them to a rundown shack on her property and, to their surprise, offers to rent it to them for $650 a month. They reluctantly agree, though they thought they were going to live there for free. After some foreshadowing about hanging up some deer antlers, even though it's a safety hazard, which is a reference to the first film, they head to town, and through awkward interaction we find out that the guy's name is Chris, who was a professional surfer, who was kicked off the team for having temper issues, who is now looking for surfer-related jobs. A guy points Chris to the direction of the Frog Brothers surf shop, which ends up just being a trailer, but when they go, no one answers the door, but we see someone peeking through the window. At dusk, Chris goes and sits on the pier, and one of the surfers from earlier appears behind him. Apparently the guy's name is Shane, and he too used to be a professional surfer who has disappeared from the public. He invites Chris to a party. Shane here is played by actor Angus Sutherland, who is the half-brother of Kiefer Sutherland, aka David, the main vampire from the original film. Though it's never outright said in the film, it is believed that he is supposed to be the brother of David from the original Lost Boys film in this as well. Chris tells his sister Nicole about the party, which he initially turns down. That is till the aunt shows up wanting to force them to watch The Goonies. Chris chooses the party over The Goonies. At the party, which pretty much looks like every episode of the MTV Beach House from the 90s, Chris immediately gets into it with one of the other guests who is a rival surfer, and he decides he wants to leave, but Nicole resists. Nicole points out a hot girl in a red bikini looking at him to distract him, and he goes over to talk to her while it becomes clear that Shane has told his crew that he has eyes for Chris's sister Nicole. The bikini girl Lisa, who is played by Monica Delain by the way, which is a dead giveaway, she's a vampire since her playing a hot monster and everything was a thing in the late 2000s, makes her move on Chris and lures him to a shower area, while Shane plays the concerned sensitive guy and gets the sibling story from Nicole, where their parents died, which led to their downfall and needing to move to where they are. He has Nicole drink out of a flask, but doesn't tell her what it is, but it immediately causes her to react weird. Meanwhile, Chris takes off in the middle of a sensual shower scene with Lisa after hearing some commotion outside, wanting to check on Nicole. He's angry to find that she's with Shane and ends up punching him, but Shane lets it go. On the way home, Nicole begins freaking out that something is wrong and pukes all over the car, with Chris reprimanding her for going off with a strange guy. When they get back home, her eyes turn black and she lifts him by the throat. He's saved when she's hit with a surfboard to the back, and we see that he was rescued by Edgar Frog, one of the protagonists of the original film. He goes to stake Nicole, but Chris ends up stopping him and kicking him out, even though Edgar warns him. After Chris puts Nicole to bed, he hears a knock on the door. When he opens it, thinking it's Edgar again, it ends up being Lisa, who asks to be invited in. He does, and she immediately pounces him. When he tries to stop her, you see that she fangs out. He throws her off, and she's impaled by the deer antlers, again a reference to the original movie. We didn't see her explode.
It tastes good.
Stop! What's the matter with you? Seriously, stop! Get off me! Off! Lisa, get off!
The next day, Chris seeks out Edgar, fully believing him now. Edgar then schools Chris on Vampire Killing 101, explaining that any sharp object through the heart can kill a vampire, explaining the Lisa situation. He also explains that someone who drinks the blood of a head vampire can become one, which then explains what is going on with Nicole, and that Nicole can be saved if the head vampire is killed before she feeds. That night, Nicole wakes up, burning up and moving erratically. She calls a guy named Evan who hit on her when she first arrived and invites him over. When he arrives, she appears very seductively and forces him on the couch. She passes him, similar to Lisa with her brother earlier, but just before she can bite him, Chris shows up and boots the guy out.
Oh, shit.
As Evan walks away dejected, we see that he's being followed by one of Shane's men. Back at the house, Chris tries to explain to Nicole that she's a half vampire and she was trying to eat Evan, which she doesn't immediately believe, but is proven via showing her that she doesn't have a reflection. Once the severity of the situation hits, she freaks out, mentioning that she's a vegetarian. Meanwhile, back outside, poor Evan meets his end when the vampires lure him to a dock warehouse. As Chris and Edgar try to figure out where Shane's hideout is, explaining that vampire lairs are always dark places based around human suffering, we see Shane calling to Nicole and her walking out. Edgar tells Chris the only way they'll find out is if he becomes part of their inner circle, so Chris agrees. Edgar warns Chris that if he forgets his role, he will off him. Nicole eventually arrives at the vampire's lair, where she and Shane have a love scene that gives the film a reason to play the new version of Cry Little Sister by Aiden. Chris heads to the police station and reports his sister missing, and they do nothing, pointing out how many other missing people there are in the town. Outside, one of the vampires confronts him and tells him if he wants to see his sister again to get in the car, where he takes him to see Shane. Chris immediately apologizes to Shane, who then tries to talk him into joining the group and explains how everyone in the group were outcast in their human life. After a random car chase scene where they bond by running from the cops as a group, he's told he can't go into the lair until he's one of them. The next night, the crew head out for a car drive when Chris is offered the vampire blood, which he drinks. They then have a campfire consisting of making girls do Girls Gone Wildish things, but then Shane decides to take off with Nicole. After they leave, the other guys attack and feed on the girls. Chris tries to help his girl escape, but she ends up getting attacked. The rest of the vampires then go after Chris. He ends up impaling the one he had the biggest problem with using a tree branch, and Edgar then chases the rest off. They then go after Shane and Nicole, with Edgar prepping weapons and warning Chris what he's up against. Back at the lair, Shane presents her with the person who is to be her first kill. Good old Evan, who isn't dead after all. Shane gives Nicole the good old "if you love me, you do" this line. In another area of the lair, Edgar and Chris have knockdown drag-out fights with the other vampires, with the hunters getting the upper hand, using their traps, leaving only Shane remaining. Chris attacks Shane, but instead of fighting back, Shane compliments Chris's spirit, and Nicole, fanged out, shows up telling him that she does not want to lose her brother. This, of course, doesn't work. They end up fighting, and with Chris's help, Nicole ends up staking Shane. Shane attempts to go down fighting, taking Nicole with him, but Chris saves the day, decapitating Shane with a sword. The film ends with Chris and Nicole back to normal, and Edgar promising to bill Shane, and Chris and Nicole's aunt reprimanding them for what she believes to have been partying and doing drugs the whole time. Or so we think. Mid-credits, we see Edgar talking to someone. It ends up being Sam Emerson, who is now a vampire. We're left with a cliffhanger as they look to go after each other. You know what that means, a sequel. While it does happen in 2010 with the film Lost Boy the Thirst, this particular setup will never get addressed, as this scene marks the last time Corey Haim and Corey Feldman will share a screen prior to Haim's untimely death the same year the third film released. Thanks for watching. If you like this content, please leave a like and subscribe, and hit the bell icon to know every time I update. If you want to help my channel grow, please check out my Patreon, where you can get access to content early, as well as see the content that can't be uploaded here on YouTube. Link will be in the description. Until next time.